These days, phones have become quite boring. So boring that Michael Fisher even started a series called When Phones Were Fun. Because back then, we had phones that were unique. Every single one had a different approach. These days, however, you cannot tell the difference between a mid-range or a high-end when it comes to the design, when it comes to most features on the phone as well. Most phones just feel like they're the same. But what if I told you there was a modern phone that is actually quite fun and makes me like it more than Samsung Galaxy S21 Ultra? Though that's not much of a task anyway. So let me introduce you to that phone. The LG Wing. I love this thing. I truly do love this thing. While it has sadly no 3.5mm headphone jack, I still love it. It's a really fun phone to have. So let's discuss the LG Wing and see how it holds up, because on paper it might not be the best, but for the use I really do love it. Let's talk about the LG Wing. But first, of course, the fancy intro stuff. I'm not kidding when I say that I find current phones to be very boring. And yes, that is somewhat down to phones being so good these days, because of the CPU being so solid, but also the cameras, displays and everything else. A year to year difference, heck, 2 years of difference isn't such a step up as it used to be. But it's also down to every phone feeling the same, looking the same, having the same DNA of a basic slab, with a large display and of course the punch hole. But the LG Wing brings me somewhat back to those days when the phones looked cool and unique, just different. While you could be fooled by just looking at it when it's closed, it all changes when you flip it open. This then becomes a whole kind of different experience. And yes, I do play with the phone, something that I often did with old school phones as well, because it's a nice distraction sometimes. And when you do open it, it also comes with some features as well, from being your control to the gimbal camera setup to using it as your secondary display. This thing is just so much fun from a day-to-day use that I really do enjoy it over a lot of competitors that simply are that slap of a phone. Well, yes, in specs it won't compete for the price at all. It seriously brings something to the table that none of those do. But while we're talking about the specs, let's just quickly look at those, because they do still matter. So it comes with a 6.8 Full HD Plus display with no cutouts because of that pop-up camera. In terms of secondary display, we have a 3.9 inch display with a 1080 by 1240 resolution. For the CPU, we have a Snapdragon 765G, and this is a 5G chip. We either have 128GB of internal memory or 256GB, but you can always expand it via the microSD. In terms of RAM, it's 8GB of RAM for both of them. It comes out of the box with Android 11, and for the camera setup, the main sensor is a 64 megapixel sensor with a 1.8 aperture. We have a 13 megapixel ultra wide sensor with 170 degrees field of view, and a 12 megapixel camera with a 2.2 aperture and a 120 degree field of view. This sensor is used for the gimbal mode. You can record video up to 4K at 60 frames per second. However, with the gimbal camera mode, you can only record up to 1080p and 30 frames per second. Now, before we continue the review, this device was sent to me by LG themselves. However, my opinions are my own and they are seeing this video at the same time as you. Okay, so with the specs out of the way and me awing over the design and how much I love using this device, let's talk about the day-to-day use, because at the end that is what matters. From day-to-day use, as stated, I do truly like it. I love it even. With that being said though, I have noticed some things that of course I have to bring up. If you are going to the swivel mode, it can take a little bit to load that app. It takes just a little bit longer than it does normally, and it's just something that I've noticed. Also, if you are using that swivel mode, if you are on the full side of it, it can tend to have that little vibration like, yeah, you're at the end now. It's something that you do notice. In terms of video recording, I also noticed that it does have some grain in it. I will show some examples, of course, as always, but you can tell that the camera in terms of video recording isn't at its best. It isn't where it shines. It's not a huge deal, but it is definitely something that I've noticed while using this phone. Overall though, in terms of pictures, the phone does perform pretty solid. Dynamic range is actually pretty decent, and it does perform well for me from day-to-day pictures. Trying to capture some shots in the city as well, the pictures come out pretty good. If again I notice something, the warmth of some shots can be different from the main sensor to of course the ultra wide sensor. Overall though, as stated, this phone can still take some really good looking pictures with some pretty solid dynamic range, and it doesn't do too much with saturation. Now something else of course is about low light shots, night shots. How does the LG Wing perform here? Here I can say it's a different experience. Normally a phone decides for you in a night mode what it does for you. It decides for you what it wants to do, it decides the duration of the exposure and anything like that. However, with the LG Wing it does it a bit different. Here it has a night view mode. This means that if you are taking an image in low light, it still will somewhat indicate how long it wants that exposure. However, you can easily control that. You can turn it down or up, and with that of course you get more or less light in. Something that I did notice while taking some low light images is that glare is definitely an issue. Most of the shots have a huge amount of glare from the lights. This is something that I of course do not prefer. I wish that LG did better here. Something else that I noticed, it sadly doesn't have stereo speakers. It only has the mono speaker at the bottom. This does mean that there's no audio facing you when you are watching a video or anything like that. And while the 3.5mm headphone jack is removed on this device, which I really do find a shame, because LG is one that sticks by that a lot, with including of course the DAC as well for it. Sadly for this one it is removed. I think it's because of space, because this kind of design does take in more space, and normally I'm one that goes against saying it's something about space, because I always said that it's just not right to say it is about space. It's about something else, because most phones simply are a little bit thicker than they were a few years ago with 6 or 7mm, and they still had the 3.5mm headphone jack. But for this one, I can get it why it doesn't have it. It seems like this whole system takes in quite a bit of space. However, with that being said, inside the box you do of course get a dongle, something that some others don't include anymore. So that is highly appreciated to have at least a compromise here. Either way, what do I think at the end of the LG Wing? Would I recommend it to you? Well, it depends. It depends on what kind of person you are. If you are a person that does enjoy playing around with things and have a different kind of experience when it comes to the phone, if you are bored about having just a basic phone, then definitely yes. I love this thing as stated, and I don't take that lightly. When I say I love a device, I say that I love a device. It's not something that I say often, because most of the phones these days are quite boring. Other than that though, I do have to say that there are some weaknesses as stated, so do keep that in mind when you buy a phone like this. But yes, if you are down to having those things where it does perform a little bit less, yeah, definitely, this is a phone that I could recommend to you. Either way, let me know what you think about the LG Wing. Would you love a device like this, something different, something unique? Or would you rather skip something like this? Or if it had those high-end specs, would you buy it then? Would you buy it if it had the latest and greatest when it comes to those specifications, but still has that same mode? Let me know in the comments below, because that's an interesting question that I have. For myself, again, definitely yes. Either way, let me know what you think about it. And of course, if you did enjoy this video and if you do have any questions, let me know in the comments below. And of course, if you do like it, of course, don't forget to leave a like. And if you aren't subscribed yet, subscribe and hit that bell icon. Either way, have a good one and talk to you guys in the next